Today we're going to be learning Eruvin Daf Pei Gimel. It's the Shabbat Daf for Shabbat of this week. This shiur is dedicated by the Greenstone cousins in honor of the birthday of our cousin Lana Kersner, a lawyer and advocate of social justice, a role model to the women and men of our family. Happy birthday. And with that, we will get started. We finished the Mishnah yesterday. We were discussing this Mishnah about different shiurim for the two seudot that one needs for Eruv Tchumim. And then we said there was a machloket. I'll refresh your memory. We'll look at the sheet. There was a machloket, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka and Rabbi Shimon, both about the size of an average loaf and how that size translated into 2 meals. According to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, that was 2 meals. According to Rabbi Shimon, it's a percentage of that. 2/3 of that is the shiur for 2 meals. They also disagreed about how big the kikar was. Is the kikar a half a kav, which is 12 eggs, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, and 1/3 of a kav, which would be 8 eggs, according to Rabbi Shimon. So now the Gemara says, the Mishnah had said, if we take this amount and we have it, half a kikar, and there's a debate whether it's a machloket, what size the kikar is, the machloket between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka will also hold true for here. Or some people say that we actually hold like Rabbi Shimon and that this part of the Mishnah is only really relating to Rabbi Shimon's opinion. So half of it for the bayit hamenugah, meaning if you walk into a house that has a leprous house, if you walk in, you become tamei immediately. But if you don't stay long enough to eat a half, you have to stay long enough in order for your clothes to become impure, is the amount of time it takes to eat a half a loaf. So it'd be half of this amount. Okay, so again, according to Rabbi Shimon, and let's pull it up. According to Rabbi Shimon, that half a loaf would be, right, 1 loaf, we said, is 1/3 of a kav. 1/3 of a kav is 8 eggs, because a kav is 24 eggs. So half of that loaf would be 4 eggs. Then we have lifsolet hagviyah. What does that mean? If I'm eating truma, the size of this shiur, which we're going to get to, which is 1/4 of this loaf. Okay, so again, we're going to drop it down. Okay, instead of 8 eggs is the kikar, it will be 2 eggs, according to Rabbi Shimon. That's the amount you need in order to be eating that will make you tamei while you're eating this truma. Tana. Now we're going to start from the top of Pei Gimel. There's another braita that says v'chatzi chetzia l'tamei tumat ochlin. Okay, and 1/4 of that loaf will be to be metamei tumat ochlin. What's 1/4? Well, if we go by Rabbi Shimon, 1/4 of 8 is 1 kibetza. Now this is the famous shiur. We've seen this before for transferring impurities. In order for food to transfer impurity to something else, it has to be a kibetza. Some people think even to become impure, it needs a kibetza. There's a machloket about that, but definitely to pass on tuma would be a kibetza. So now the Gemara asks, "V'tana didam, my time alo tani tumat ochlin." So why didn't our Tana mention tumat ochlin? The answer is mishum de lo shavu shiurayu. Okay, we're now going to say this isn't yet clear, but our Mishnah mentioned only the first 2, bayit menuga lifsol tagviyah, not l'tamei tumat ochlin, because the shiurim were not shavim. What does that mean? They weren't equal. So what does this mean exactly? So we kind of could say it's not an exact measurement. What's not an exact measurement? So now we're going to see. Ditanya. To each other. In other words, the relationship between these, it seems very clear. A half, 1/4, an 1/8, they seem very clear. But now we're going to see that the shiur of a kibetza for tumat ochlin is set, very clear. And the other ones, there's a debate about how big they are, and they're not exactly exactly a betza. We're going to see. So now we're going to see that, and then we're going to show, since those aren't exactly kibetza, they didn't want to mention this as compared, the tumat ochlin as compared to those, because it would sound like, well, if those are a little more or a little less than a kibetza, then this is also related. But no, it's not. It has its own independent, it's clearly exactly a betza and not a little bit more, a little bit less, and therefore they didn't want to use that comparison. So now we're going to see, as it says in the braita, v'kama shiur chatzi pras, how much is a chetzi pras? Okay, now chetzi pras, a pras is a half a loaf. How much is 1/4 of a loaf? Okay, this would match lifsolet hagviyah, the 1/4. Shnei beitzim, right, that matches Rabbi Shimon, that 8 beitzim, so 1/4 of that would be 2. Chaser kimat, minus a little bit. It's a little bit less than 2 eggs. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, you're going to see from this chart here that there's 3 opinions here. Rabbi Yossi omer, shnei beitzim sochakot. 2 eggs that are a little wider. Remember, we had the tefach that was tight or a little looser. So here also, we're going to say a beitza with a little bit, like what do you think of? And we go to the store and you buy eggs. There's medium, there's large, there's extra large. So we're saying the extra large size. Okay, we all know that it makes a difference. Shiur Rebbe measured shnei beitzim ve'od, 2 and a little bit more. Okay, so he had this, right? We have 2 and a little bit less. We have 2 large, extra large eggs, and then we have 2, but a little bit more. How much is that little bit more, they ask? Ve'od kama, ve'od echad me'esrim bebeitza. Okay, 1/20th of an egg. So it's an egg. Each egg is measured as 1 plus another 1/20th. Ve'ilu gabei tumat ochlin. So that was the chatzi pras, which is relevant lifsolat hagviyah. Ve'ilu gabei tumat ochlin tanya Rabbi Natan v'Rabbi Dosi amru kibeitza she'amru kamo u'keklipata v'chachamim omrim kamo below klipata. Both of the opinions about tumat ochlin says that it's going to be kamoa v'keklipata or kamoa beli klipata. It's either the egg with its shell or the egg without its shell, but it's not any more than an egg or any less than an egg. So you see here that when it comes to tumat ochlin, the measurement is exactly 2. And when it comes to the other shiurim, the measurement is not exactly 2. And that's why it measured those and it didn't add these, because if you added these, you would have thought that these are relative to those, but the tumat ochlin, and it's not, and therefore they don't say it. Okay, the Gemara continues. Amar from Bar Papa, Amar Rav Chisda. Zo divrei Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbi Yossi. That all was based on what we just read about the Chatzi Pras, was based on the measurements of Rabbi Shimon, basically. So we're saying this is what Rabbi Yehuda said. Aval chachamim omrim kebeitza v'mechza sochakot. But chachamim say that it's actually 1.5 large, extra large eggs or large eggs. Uman chachamim, and who is that? Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. Again, go back to our chart. Why is this match Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka? Because if you say it's 1.5 instead of 2, the chatzi pras, right? The half of a loaf, the quarter of a loaf. Instead of being 2 eggs, it's 1.5. That makes perfect sense with Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, that a kikar is a half a kav, which is a kav would be, right, that's, 1 second, a half a kav, right? He would say that, right, the kikar, the reva of the kikar, wait, it would be 12, hold on, I just got stuck for 1 second. Okay, so I realized what happened. I was going back to our original understanding of Rabbi Yochanan, which was that a su'udah, as it says here, a su'udah is, sorry, let me just open it. A su'udah is a quarter of a kav. But in the end, if you remember, we said because of the cost of the markup, it really ends up being that the su'udah is really 1/8 of a kav. That's where we got to 8 and 9 is not much different. So 1 su'udah is 1/8 of a kav, which is already going to lower it, right, to half this amount. Instead of 12 beitzim, there's actually going to be 6 eggs in a kikar, in a 1 kikar. If there's 6 eggs, and then we do a quarter of that, we're going to get ourselves to our number of what we just said of 1.5 eggs. Okay, so that gets us to 1.5 eggs. And that's what we're going to say, that whole brighta we saw was all only according to the approach of Rabbi Shimon, but there's also another approach, which is that it's Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. So now it says here, right, Chachamim say kibeitza v'mechza sochakot. And then they say, Man Chachamim, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. And who is the rabbis? Oh, that matches Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. So now they say, wait a minute, Pshita sochakot. Pshita. Isn't that obvious? If it's 1.5 eggs, then obviously that's Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, because he's the one who holds that 1 kikar is 6 eggs. So now they say, sochakot atalashmina. No, they wanted to tell you that even Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka holds that they're eggs that are sochakot, large ones. Ki atar of dimi amal. Now we're going to have more about measurements. Shiger bonyus lerebi mudya de kundus. So bonyus, which is a person, sent to Rebbe a measuring implement called a kundus. Demin nausa. It was a kundus from Neusa. Okay, it had a se'ah's worth from Neusa. Vishi'er Rebbe, and Rebbe estimated how many eggs are in this kundus. Matan u'shvaesre be'in. It had 217 eggs. So now the Gemara is going to say, wait a minute, what kind of se'ah has 217 eggs? Okay, let's go back now to the sheet and we'll check out all our measurements. So now we're going to say, ha se'ah dehecha. What kind of se'ah are we talking about? Okay, Okay, we're now going to learn that there was a difference, and this comes up a lot of times in the Torah, in the Gemara, that there were different measurements in different times, and the measurements changed over time. Okay, they were larger. They got larger over time. This is why, for example, a kazayit that we eat on Pesach, when we measure the kazayit, it's much bigger than actually what seems like an olive bulk because the measurements got larger. Okay, so now we're going to say, it's 144 eggs in a se'ah. Okay, now we're going to start learning all the measurements. How many eggs were in a se'ah? Okay, we said in a se'ah, there's, right, let's go back to the top. In a se'ah, we have 20, right, we have each is 6 kabim, okay? And 6 kabim are made up of, each kav is 24 eggs. So 24 times 6 gets you to 144. So that's the midbariyot. So that certainly doesn't match 217. The Id Yerushalmit, Kufayin Gimel, 173. Okay, how do we get to that? So we're going to, right, that's basically an increase of a fifth from 144. Because each time we're going to see that they go up a fifth. Okay, right? Actually, I forgot to do the math on the sheet, but I did the math when I was preparing. It comes out a little bit off. Okay, if you add a fifth, you do 144 times 1.2, you're going to get to 172.8, which is close to 173. Okay, they're not, it's not exact here, but Id Yerushalmiyot, it's going to be 173 hafya. V'idit Tziporiot, which is another fifth greater than that. Okay, so again, multiply by 172.8 times 1.2, it's going to get you to 207.36. So Idit Tziporiot, they say Reish Zayin, it's 207. Okay, so again, they do it estimating. Reish Zayin Havyan. So it doesn't match any of them, right? It's at least close to 207, but it's still 217. So the Gemara is going to answer L'olam dit Tziporit. Okay, now, so they're saying it's the Tziporit. How could it be though? It's off by 10. Let's add to it the hafrashat chala that you had to do. We just learned about hafrashat chala. It's 1 out of 24. So they're going to say, add that. Okay, so now that doesn't really make so much sense either though. Okay, now they're going to say, chalta kamahavyan, timne. It's really going to be 8. Okay, now we're going to see it's either 8 or 9. And in fact, Tosfot has a girsa that it's 9 and not 8, and then it's a mistake here. So let's read. So let's figure out, how do we get there? So we learned the chala for a balabayit is 1 out of 24. So if you do 1 out of 24 times 207, you get to 8.625. And if you do 1 in 24 times 1 over 24 times 9.04, then you're going to get to, times 217, you're going to get to 9.04. So again, it's either going to be 8.6 or 9.04. Either which way, you're not going to get up to the number that we're looking for, which is we need 10 more because it was 207 and we're trying to get to 217. So, by the way, how do you get, sorry, I wasn't clear why I just did these two calculations. I forgot to explain. If you go by what the Gemara says that it's 8, then you'd have to assume that they multiply it by 207. Now that's a little bit weird because you're saying the challah is 1 out of 24 of the final amount you get after you already take the challah out. That doesn't make so much sense. So it makes more sense to say you're taking the challah out of 217, out of the whole amount, and then you would get to 9, which would then get you down to 208, and that's not what it's here, it's 207. So either which way, the calculation doesn't work. Again, there's two possible options as to how they did the calculation. Akate b'tzarlu, so it still doesn't work. Oh, here's our solution. If you remember, going back, and I'll show you in the chart, we said that shiur Rebbe, that what kind of eggs are we talking about? 2 eggs and a bit. And how much is a bit? 1 over 20. So if you say that these 207 eggs are really 207 eggs plus a 20th for each egg, so do a 20th times 207, you get 10.35. So you're going to end up, that's the added 10 that we add, and that's how we get to 217. So the measuring implement they had was basically a measuring implement of Tzipori ones, which were 207, but each one was an egg plus a 20th, which is going to get you up another 10 to 217. So now they say, wait a minute. Now, all of a sudden, it's very strange because until now, they don't really seem to care about decimals, but apparently sometimes they did. Right? So now they say it's more. It's 10.35, so it should be 217.35. So why don't you say that? So the answer came because it wasn't a whole egg, so they just didn't count it in the calculation. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're going to talk about the comparison of all these measurements. Okay, and here I also did the calculations for you on the sheet to help you, and we'll use it here on the share screen. Tanu Rabbanan. Se'ah Yerushalmit yitera midbarit shtot. So the Se'ah Yerushalmit is a 6th grader. Now, before I did my calculation with a 5th, but that's because in this, every time we have a chomesh, it's really a quarter. Whenever we say shtot, we mean a 6. That means if you add it and then subtract from there, when you take the greater number, once you add, let's say we start with the midbariyot, they're smaller, we want to add a 5th. Now, when we have the whole amount and we take out a 6th, we'll get back down to that original amount that we started with. So you could call it a 6 or you could call it a 5th. It depends which direction you're looking from. So they're now going to say, so the Se'ah Yerushalmit is more than the midbarit by a 6th. And shel tzipori yitera Yerushalmit shtot. And the next one also, the tzipori is greater than the Yerushalmi by a 6. By the way, I didn't discuss what does it mean midbari, Yerushalmi, tzipori. So midbari is what they did when they were living in the desert. Yerushalmi is what they did further on, maybe in the time, sometime by Rishon, in the time of Shlomo and the first temple period. And the tzipori is the later time period when the rabbis, at some point anyway, the center was in tzipori. So more in rabbinic times. So those are the different generations and the changes. So now I'm not going to get into why shiurim changed and all that. That's another whole topic. We'll leave it out for right now. So now we're going to say nimtza. Okay, so after we say each one is a 6 greater than the other. Okay, so now we'll just do the calculations. A 6th of 172 is 28.67. If you do 173, now this is what I said. You do a 6th minus, oh, sorry, I did that wrong. It's by 173. A 6 times, 1 second, let me just calculate it because I see I did it wrong here. A 6 times 173 equals 28.33. Okay, so this actually gets you to, so then you have 173 minus that, you get to 144.167. Okay, so you're very close to 144, which is exactly what you're looking for. So if you take that number away, again, you take the greater number, 173, you do a 6th of that, it gets you to 28.33. You subtract that from 173, you get to 144.163. So there you see the difference. Now, if you take the tzipori, which is 207, and you multiply it by a 6, you get 34.5. 207 minus 34.5 gets you to 172.5, which rounds up to 173. Now they say this interesting line, which is a little bit tricky. So if that's lower by a 6 and that's lower by a 6, or that's greater by a 6 and that's greater by a 6, you're going to say the difference between the lowest number and the highest number is going to be a third, because you would say a 6 and a 6 is a third. But it's not exactly true, because each time it takes a 6 off and this number doesn't really make sense. Right? I can explain to you mathematically why it doesn't make sense. The Gemara is going to, it's from a logical perspective, because each time you're taking a 6th off of another and then a 6th off of that. It's not 2/6 off of the top number or greater, right? It doesn't work that way. So basically, the Gemara is going to question it and say, this doesn't make sense. So the Gemara is going to ask, shlish deman, shlish of what? Ilema shlish de midbarit. So michte shlish de midbarit kamahavian. So now they're going to basically go and they're going to say, all the shlishes, okay? So now if you want to do, let's just start with the difference between 207 and 144, which is the difference that we're trying to say is a third, and we need to understand a third of what. So what is that number? The number is 63. 207 minus 144 is 63. Starting with that as our premise, we're now looking for a third of something, which is going to equal 63, which I'll tell you right now that we're not going to actually find. So first they say, let's start with, okay, a third of what? Maybe it's a third of the midbarit itself, of 144. So michtish lish midbarit kamahavian arba'im v'timnaya. Okay, it's 48, because if you do a third of 144, you get to, 1 second, right. Then you're going to get to 48, and then ilu odfa shitin utlat. But the odef, sorry, I wrote this wrong. Okay, this is what happens when I rush through making the sheet. At least I can correct it while I'm teaching. 1/3 times 144 comes out to 48, right? we're looking for 63. The problem is we're not getting to 63 because this isn't, right? This is 48. It's totally off. It's definitely not, the difference isn't a third of the 144. Next one. V'ilu odfa, okay, and the odef, the one number we're looking for is shishim v'tlat, is 63. Ela shlish Yerushalmi. So let's go on our list. Maybe it's a third of the Yerushalmi. Now this would be weird to say the difference between Tzipori and Midbari, the two extremes, is a third of the middle one. But anyway, they're going to try it. Shlish jida kamahavien chamishim v'timnaya. Okay, it's actually 57.67. That's a third of 173. So that's not going to work. Oh, they actually say it. Sorry, I didn't finish reading. Chamishim v'timnaya, here they use decimals. Nechi tilta, minus a third, okay, which is 57.67. And v'ilu odfa, what we're looking for is shitim v'tlat, 63. Ve'ela de tzipori, what about, maybe it's a third of tzipori. So shlish jida kamahave, shivin nechi chada. Okay, it's 69. That's over now, right? Because now we're going to end up, right? It's 1/3 of 207 is 69. So again, we're going to have a problem. So we're looking for 63. Ella amar Rabbi Yirmiyah hachi kamar. So Rabbi Yirmiyah says, I'm going to explain it differently. What they meant to say was, se'ah shel tzipori yitera midbarit karov l'shlish shela. Oh, it meant that if you take a third, which is 69 of the tzipori, and the difference between the midbari and the tzipori is close to that. It's 63, 69, not so far off. The shlish shela, and then he adds this other thing, which not sure where he gets this from in the wording, but he says, and another factor that's interesting about it, this is kind of like playing with numbers and saying, oh, well, the number this is like that. Shlish shela karov lemechze de midbarit. Okay, what is this? The third, okay, a third of the tzipori, which is 69, is also close, and it's close to the difference between them, right? The difference between the tzipori and the midbari as 63. It's also close to half of the midbari, which is 144 divided by 2, 72. It's also close to that. So Maskevla Ravina says, what are you talking about, Rabbi Yirmiyah? Midi karov katani. It doesn't say it's close to. That's not what it said. It said a third, right? It said, actually, let's read the words exactly. It says here, nimset shel tziporit. The tzipori one is yitera al midbarit shlish. It's more than the midbari by a third. So it doesn't say it's close to this, it's close to that. So therefore, Ravina says something else. Amar Ravina, hachi kama. Nimset shlish shel tzipori beve'odiyot shel Rebbe. Remember the ode, the 1/20th? Okay, so the tzipori, now we're back to, well, actually the tzipori, if you add the odiot of Rebbe, you add another 10. That gets you up to 217. A third of 217 is what? 72.33. So now that's yetera. Remember there was the yetera. Okay, it said it's more than, we said it's more than a third, but now he's going to say, no. A third of it is more than mechza shel midbariot shlish. Mechza midbariot shlish betza. It's okay. Now, instead of saying it's tzipori is yitera midbarit shlish, it says the third of tzipori, which is 72.33, is more than the half of the midbari, which is 72 exactly. Remember, 144 divided by 2 is 72, is more than that by a shlish, by a third of an egg, because it's 72.33. Here you see, by the way, they're very careful about decimals. They're trying to tell you exactly by what fraction is it greater than half of the midbari. Now, why they would make that calculation is a very strange calculation. Say a third of the tzipori is greater than the half of the midbari by a third. Very difficult to understand. But that's how they come up with some number that actually fits in here. Okay, those were the complicated calculations. We're going to have only one more complicated calculation for today coming up soon. Tanu Rabbanan, Reshit Arisotechem. So now we're talking about challah. When it comes to challah, so you have to take the first of your dough, right? The bit of your, some of your dough goes to the kohen. V'kama isotechem. So they say, Kedei, Reshit Arisotechem, the drasha is Kedei isotechem, like your isa. In other words, you have to give the size of your, it has to be that when you're giving it, you're going to get a size of a loaf, Okay, so there's a minimum. This teaches you there's a minimum amount for how much in order to take to be chayiv, to take challah, it has to be a minimum amount. This is why people often try to make more challah so they can be mafresh challah according to the law with a bracha. So what is this measurement? The kama isotechem. Here there's a big debate among the commentaries exactly how much this comes out to. We're not going to get into the details for today, but kama isotechem, how much is your irregular dough? Kedei isat midbar, like they made dough in the desert. Now, how do we know how much dough they made in the desert? Kama isat midbar. It tells us the Omer, this is describing the man. The man was asirit ha'efa, a tenth of an efa. Mikan amru, shiv'a revi'im kemach ve'od chayevet b'challah. From here, they taught us that 7 quarters of flour and a little bit more is obligated in challah. Okay, how do we get there? So let's go through. So now we're going to learn that, okay, a core is 30 se'ah. A bat is 1/10 of a core. A bat comes up in one of the psukim, and it's equated with an ephah. So an ephah is a tenth of a se'ah, a tenth of 30 se'ah, which would be 3 se'ah. So an ephah is 3 se'ah, which is 18 kabim, which is, we learned already, a se'ah is 6 kav, right? That's why 3 se'ah is 18 kabim, which is 144 eggs. So a kav is 24 eggs, right? So sorry, I'm going backwards. Because a kav is 24 eggs, so a se'ah is going to be 144 eggs. So if we take a tenth of that, we're going to get to 1.8 kabim, okay, a tenth of that measurement, which is going to be 43.2 beitzim. Okay, a tenth of that is 1.8, right? And we're going to end up with, 1 second, right. I did there what a se'ah is. A se'ah is 144, but if you turn the eggs, right, you multiply them by 3, you're going to get to 432. Okay, so 43.2 eggs is going to be 1.8 kabim. That's how much you're chayav in challah. And 1.8 is 7/4, right? Because it's quarters, right? It's 1 and 3/4, which is 7/4. Ve'od, and a little bit more. That's how we got to 1.8. Okay, that was their equation. Then they're going to tell us, just to complicate us even more, shehen shisha shel Yerushalmit, shehen chamisha shel tzipori. Okay, now they're going to say that's 6 quarters, which is going to be 1.5. Okay, if you do 1.8 times 5 6, because each one is greater than by 6, you're going to get to 1.5. And 5 of tzipori, you're going to get to 5 quarters is going to be 1.25. Which is, again, what if you take 1.5 and you multiply that by 5 6, you're going to get 1.25. Okay, so mikan amru, ha'ochel k'midah zo harei ze bari u'mevorach, yeter hakem ra'avtan, pachot mikam mekukal b'me'ah. We get this nice line at the end, maybe to soften things up after having all this complicated mathematics, to say, and this is just part of that braita about the kadeh isotechem, how much you're chayav in challah. That's an amount that if you eat this amount, that's healthy and blessed and mevorach. More than that, it's a ra'avtan. It's like you're eating, like you're famished. And less than that, it's not good for your stomach. It's not enough food to be eating. Okay, so they're telling you this is the amount that a person should eat. Okay, moving on to the next Mishnah. And from here, we're going to move off of my sheet. We're going to actually bring up the pictures from the Ma'ora, from the pictures that we normally use. Okay, 1 second. Let me just organize that. Okay, so we move now to a new Mishnah, and now we're back to, let me just pull up the pictures. Okay, now we are back to Eruv Chatzerot. Okay, we did a little digression there. We were talking about Eruv Tchumen and how much food you need and how to do it for other people. We're now back to our topic. So Anshe Chatzer v'Anshe Merpeset. Let's assume we have a courtyard at the bottom and we have a Merpeset at a height of 10 tfachim. And now those are considered 2 separate domains, which is very interesting. Until now, we thought the whole courtyard's the same. We're now going to learn that it's kind of like 2 separate spaces. So if shachachu v'lo irvu, let's say they didn't make an eruv together, okay? So Rashi says, okay, otherwise this doesn't really make sense. If you look at the first Rashi, hachi garsina b'matnit, and this is the way you should read the Mishnah. Anshe chatzer v'anshe merpeset v'chule, v'lo irvu elu emelu, aval irvu elu latzman ve'elu latzman. But they each made the merpeset made an eruv and the chatzer made an eruv. In other words, they made an eruv for the people at the bottom and they made an eruv for the people in the merpasot. Okay, so that's what he says must be the case. And there's a ladder that leads up to the merpeset, as you see there. That's from Rashi in this picture. They all go down the ladder from the merpeset and out to the Reshut HaRabim that way. But still, they can be considered separate units. Okay, in other words, sulamot only help us, they don't make it worse for us. Okay, and it's as if there's a mechitza between them. Okay, as if they're separated. So now the question becomes, here you have a beam. You see the beam, it's 10 tefachim tall. If that's the case, that belongs to the merpeset. Anything lower than that belongs to the chatzer. So who can carry from there? If you're in the merpeset and it's higher than 10, it's yours. If you're in the courtyard, you can't if it's higher than 10. If it's less than 10, it's the reverse. Chuliyat habor, that's also in the picture on the left there. If you have, remember, the mound of dirt that's created when you dig a ditch, the hasela, or a rock, gvohim asarat tefachim, lamerpeset, again, the same thing. If it's 10 tefachim high, it goes to the merpeset, pachot michan lachatzer. By the way, when is this all said though? And this you can see from the picture. Bismucha, if they're right next to the merpeset. But aval b'mufleget, if it's far away, afilu gavoa asarat tefachim lachatzer, then it belongs to the courtyard, because if there's no access point from the merpeset, then it's going to belong to the courtyard. Ve'ezehi smucha, what is it considered to be close? Kol she'ein arachok arba'at tefachim. We go back to our measurement of 4 tefachim that we've seen many times. Now the Gemara is going to say, well, based on things we've learned until now, pshita, the following things are obvious, and from that they're going to ask a question. Pshita lezeh bepetach ulezeh bepetach, hainu chalon sheben shtei chatzerot. Let's say we have a window between our 2 courtyards, and it's easy for both of us to access. Okay, so here they have a picture here where it's, right, I'm trying to think what exactly. I guess it's just a place that's just as easily accessible to both sides. Or lezeh bizrika or lezeh bizrika, or each can throw, meaning it's high up. Like here you have a wall that's 10 tefachim tall. And we said a wall that's 10 tefachim tall is difficult to access for either of them, but they could each throw onto there. So hainu kotel sheben shtei chatzerot. Remember what we said there, right? Sorry, I wasn't clear about. They said if it's lezeh bepetach or lezeh bepetach, we already learned that case. It's like a window between 2 courtyards. Now, a window between 2 courtyards, what did we say? If my courtyard doesn't make an eruv with your courtyard, and we have a window that's accessible to both of us equally, both of us can get there, just like with the window or just like with the wall. And therefore, neither of us is allowed to put anything on there because we forbid each other. It's as if we're connected. So even if it's less accessible, but if it's just as equally inaccessible to both, then no one can do it. What if it's lowering down, like let's say it's 10 tefachim deep in the ground? That's hainu charit sheben shtei chatzerot. We already learned that. If there's a ditch between 2 courtyards and it's 10 deep, then again, nobody can carry there because it's equally inaccessible to both. But lezeh bepetach, what if it's lezeh bepetach or lezeh bizrika? What if for one, it's easy, right? There's no picture here, I don't think. No, we're not there yet. Okay, we'll get to this picture in a minute. What if it's lezeh bizrika? For one, it's very accessible, and the other one, it's very high. Hainu de Rabba bar Rav Huna. That's what Amar Rav Nachman. We already learned, if you remember, if it's noach tashmish, it's comfortable for one and not for the other, then it goes to the one who it's noach for. They have access and the other one doesn't. And lezeh bepetach or lezeh b'shulshul, likewise, if one has easy access and the other one has to go deep down into a ditch, then hainu to Rav Shizbi, Amar Rav Nachman. Also, Rav Shizbi said in the name of Rav Nachman about the ditch case, where again, lezeh shetashmisho benachat, the one who it's easy for, he gets access. The one who it's difficult for doesn't have access. But here comes the question finally, and here's picture number 277. Lezeh b'shulshulu, lezeh b'zrika. What if one has a ditch in front of him and the other has, for the other, it's 10 high? Okay, for one, it's a wall. For the other, it's a ditch, because again, their houses aren't on the same level. And then it's equally inaccessible to both, but in a different way. So what's the story? Amar Rav Shnehem Asawim. He says, what's the difference? It's both equally inaccessible. Shmuel Amar Notnim Oto Lezeh shebeshulshul. The one who it's down, it's a ditch, is actually, he gets it. Why? because shelezeh tashmisho benachat ulezeh tashmisho bekasheh. V'chol davar shetashmisho lezeh benachat ulezeh bekasheh notnim oto lezeh shetashmisho benachat. He says it's easier to get to something that's deep in the ground than to get something that's high up on a wall. And therefore, he says in that case, I would view that comparison as for him it's comfortable, for the other one it's not, and therefore the one who is for the ditch gets access. Okay, we'll stop here for today. They're going to then bring a Mishnah, our Mishnah, and we're going to see the connection to use it as a question. Okay, we'll stop here. Have a Shabbat Shalom or Shavua Tov to everybody.